But yeah, no. So this, like I said, my name's Davey Jones. Got my colleague over here. I'm the junior field officer. He's a senior field officer. You can tell by the lack of hair. This is Kerry. She's our real boss, but we just don't tell her that. And you've got Dylan down the back who's just joined us. He's got the notice board. He looks important, but he's not. Okay. The one important person over here is this guy in the blue. He's out there. He's got all your registration for your cars, so we're just scamming all those. Make sure we've got nobody dodgy. No, I'm just joking. He'll give me the pat on the head. Oh, he's not doing it. Okay, we are doing that. So yeah, as you can see, I'll step out of the way and try not to step on anything. This is our agenda for the evening. We're going to be starting with John and myself. We'll be talking about rigging the river or water safety. Then Mike from New Zealand Police, Danny First Aid. We've all got relatively 20 minutes, so we're asking just a bit of housekeeping too, is that if there's any questions, hold it till the end of the evening, and then you can come and approach and talk to whoever you wanted to, if you have a question to ask. Another thing is toilets are just outside there. In the unlikely event of an emergency, we'll just run over and grab Mike and say, help save us. But no, we won't. We'll get out the doors and across outside the car park, and we'll assemble at the power pole on the other side, and we'll wait for emergency services, depending on what it may be. So yeah, let's. You can see our list of talkers there. We've got some great speakers tonight. Firstly though, we do have to start with the voucher draw. And this was drawn outside earlier by Kerry, myself and Dylan. Do you have the names that we on the list there, mate? The ones that Kerry asterisks?
So Andy Parton.
Andy Parton. It's a $100 gift voucher from Fishing Aid. And
Colin Wranglers.
Colin, there you go. Great stuff. And there will be another 2 voucher draws at the closure at the end of the meeting. So, yep, we'll hand it over. I'll hand it over to my senior colleague. I'll help him up out of his check now. You've got to give him a stick, eh?
Yeah, thanks, Davey.
No problem.
But jokes aside, actually, I am nursing a bit of a sore knee at the moment, compliments of the Narara River, so yeah, just a reminder that we need to be careful out there. And I'm going to kind of struggle because I've got 2 hands and I need 3 to hold my notes here, but we'll do the best as we go along. So I've headed up water safety for trout fishers and game bird hunters. Key thing is we want everyone to go out there, have fun, but get home safe, get home well. We were going to talk about river crossing, but there's some really good info online. I've printed off a nice little double-sided handout there from Mountain Safety Council on river crossing. From my experience, most accidents happen for anglers and shooters when they're actually doing their hunting or fishing or whatever it is they're doing, when they're on the river trying to catch a fish. Getting across the river is relatively safe for most of us, but it's when you're there in a big gnarly pool, broken water, big boulders, and you hook that fish that you think is the fish of a lifetime and it goes dashing off down the river, and far too often people end up with a great tangle of their line everywhere, get tangled up in it, fall over in the river, injure themselves, and everything goes pear-shaped. So sad to say it, but the most dangerous thing we do when we're out there fishing is actually hook a fish, from my experience, because that's when most people seem to have their accidents. So what are the dangers? Swept away, drowning and injury, those are the obvious ones. But slips and falls, so broken, dislocated fingers, arms, legs, head injuries, they all happen. I've seen far too many. Climate related, people get wet and cold, end up with exposure. And then the other one that we tend to forget, but particularly important, as everyone's talking about global warming, is heat stroke. But yeah, the slips and falls and the climate related ones are the ones I've seen and been involved in by far the most. Fortunately, I haven't had anyone drown when I've been out there, but I've had mates and colleagues, even the young fit ones, dislocate fingers recently. I've seen far too many people put their knees out in the river, get a twist on slippery boulders and things. And I guess, you know, the big thing is it all comes down to our footing, you know, making sure that we're putting our feet in the appropriate places and we've got good footwear on. Too cold and wet exposure. I've had exposure once, didn't realise it. Luckily I had a good mate and I was starting to sort of feel a little bit, you know, a little bit unco, a little bit gumby. I'd fallen over, it was wet and windy, didn't have a good windbreaker on, a couple of hours like that, and I was starting to suffer from it. Unfortunately, you know, and this is really important, if you're fishing with a good mate or hunting with a good mate, you look after each other, you keep an eye on each other. He said, "Hey mate, you okay? I said, "Oh, I'm feeling a little bit rough." We stopped, I put on my raincoat, we lit a fire, cooked ourselves something hot, and you know, managed it. But yeah, if you're on your own, or if I had been on my own, things could have ended quite differently. I had a mate fall over and break his lower leg and his ankle, ended up with about 8 or 10 screws in it, and that was just on the way to the river through some pine forest. He slid, fairly steep slope, lots of pine needles, slid, his heel of his boot caught in some blackberry, and he basically sat down on his leg heavily and yeah, broke a bone in his lower leg and pretty much destroyed his ankle. So it's incredibly easy. You know, we think we're all indestructible, but it's incredibly easy to get caught out with an accident. Now, because it's work, many of these challenges can be avoided or minimised with a bit of planning. It's a little bit like the old health and safety thing. Eliminate, isolate, or mitigate the danger. So, you know, before I go fishing, I do a quick risk assessment. Where am I going today? Hey, I'm going to go and fish in the Turokuri, close to town, Shingly River, fairly low flows, safe. Well, okay, I can just wear my normal tramping boots. Conversely, if I'm going up the Mohaka, say, it's a whole lot further away, bigger, more powerful river, big slippery boulders.
It's got that very flash, expensive boots there.
So if I'm in the Mohaka, I make sure that I'm wearing something, proper wading boot, ideally with some tungsten studs in it. Makes all the difference. You know, recently I had a fall in the river and bashed my shin really badly. 3 weeks later, the bruising's still coming out. That was because I decided to try some other boots, and surprisingly, they were actually not bad in the water. But once I got out of the river and started trying to run along chasing the fish I hooked on nice dry grey boulders, they were as slippery as, and I did a bit of a face plant. Really badly hurt my knee, didn't break it. Got up, carried on, landed the fish and let it go, so it all ended okay. But yeah, to me, and I mentioned it a few times in here, footwear is so important. If you're going to survive in a river, especially a big bouldery river, good quality wading boots with tungsten studs in it, and possibly a wading pole makes all the difference. You know, when wading boots first arrived, they had felt soles, and I remember going fishing with my brother. I had my standard old nice lightweight tramping boots. He had these flash new things that had this funny carpety looking stuff on the bottom of it. We got to the first crossing, which was on the Mohaka, and it was a really rough, bouldery run that, you know, normally you'd think twice about crossing. And he just bowled across it. We got to the other side, and I got about 10 paces out, 10 steps out into it, and got to thigh deep, and suddenly I'm stuck there not wanting to go forward or back, and sort of, hey bro, come back and give us a hand. And you know, there again, good mates that look after you, but the thing was, he had really good footing, and he just bowled across it. He took me to this place he'd been before. He'd been there with his flash new wading boots, and was used to it, and with my old rubber boots, I'm slipping and sliding, so, you know, he was able to help me out, but that was the biggest revelation I think I've ever had in traction in the outdoors, is the difference between a good wading boot and just your standard old rubber boots. So yeah, a quick risk assessment. Hey, if we're going to a big bouldery river, and it's up the mountains, it's going to be colder, more chance of a whole lot heavier rain, possibly snow, all those sort of things. So, you know, we're taking a good warm jacket, we're taking, you know, a merino underlayer, and we're making sure that we've got really good boots on. So, yeah, personally, if I'm going out, even if it's just for a couple of hours in the evening, I always have my little day pack. Some mates laugh at me, but I always have my PLB, a lightweight raincoat, a survival blanket, a lighter, normally some fire, and some actual fire lighter material in there as well, some muesli bars, and some water in my day pack. That goes with me every time. And you know, the number of times that I've been out, you know, I'll just go and have a quick couple of hour fish or whatever, and a torch is the other important one. You end up having a great evening, and you end up a couple of hours away from the car and it gets dark or the weather turns. So, you know, it's so easy, and most importantly, if I have an accident, hopefully that gear I've got there with me will see me through the night if I need to, or until someone gets there when I trigger my PLB. So, you know, I remember as a kid, my dad used to say to me, you know, make sure you have your raincoat and some food with you. We didn't have PLBs then, it was a you know, map and a compass, but personal locator beacon I think is invaluable. And you know, interesting talking to one of the other speakers here tonight, talking about the Starlink for phones. And so, okay, we have phone coverage everywhere. It would be a real worry if people stopped taking PLBs with them. Oh, I don't need to replace my PLB, I got my phone. Your phone battery goes flat. It doesn't actually give you an exact location for the rescue chopper to come and pick you up. So yeah, of all the things that I would recommend people got, a PLB would be the first thing, particularly if you're considering fishing in sort of mountain areas. You know, you go up to the Kawikas or go to Kurupapong, walk up the Narrow, the Mohaka, wherever. Next slide I've got, just to try and illustrate it, got the Waipawa at Highway 50, nice and shingly, nice low river, you know, you bowl across there, it's a little more than ankle deep. This is in the Upper Mohaka, and you know, out here it's probably about waist deep, nice clean water. It's deceptive, you know, lots of people go to our high country rivers and down south, and they're used to dirtier water, and they look across, oh yeah, that's cool, I can bowl across there. Next thing they know, they're this deep and going sideways. So, you know, just remember in these high country areas, nice clean water, it's often very deceptive just how deep that water is. But you've got the added problem of boulders, and you know, what I try to do, I haven't found a wading boot yet that will actually alleviate the problem for me, is if you've got big boulders, don't cross there. You stand on the top of a boulder, you're going to slide until you get to the edge of it where, you know, it meets another boulder. So when we're crossing through here, you know, I wouldn't cross through there anyway, but you know, you're looking at it and, hey, is there big boulders, is there big logs, you know, what sort of obstacles have I got? But you look at the two rivers, you know, chalk and cheese. So, you know, if you go in here, the gear you need is going to be a bit different. And you need to be prepared for the fact that that river there could come up and be uncrossable within about half an hour. So that, you know, that's something you need to plan for. Okay, so resources. Now when I started fishing as a young guy, we didn't have the regional council river flows chart to go and have a look at. Forecasts were pretty average, like you might get a mountain forecast, but it was always a coastal forecast. You know, we've got Niwa do really good mountain forecasts, and you know, I can't emphasise that enough. If you're fishing high country rivers, there's not much point looking at the Napier forecast. You know, if you want to go up to Mohawk or Narrara, have a look at the Kawika forecast, or as I do, have a look at the Turangi forecast. Because those rivers, where the main catchment of that is most affected by the westerly winds, the westerly conditions. So you'll get heavy rain in Turangi and Taupo and in the head of the Mohaka and Narrara. You won't see it here on the coast. I've been into Cameron Hut, walked up there one afternoon, and we're walking up the river, not far from the hut. Some of the crossings seemed a little bit deeper than I expected, and I didn't really think much of it. But I remember once we saw half an hour or so later what actually happened. Remember, as we're getting to the edges, there's a few beech leaves and twigs and things moving around the edges. We were actually climbing out, and the main flow just looked a little bit sort of not quite as clear as it had been. So we arrived at the hut, did the usual thing, had a fight over who's having which bunk, had a quick read of the hut book. I had time for a brew, probably about 20 minutes later. Walked down to the river to get a billy of water and couldn't believe what I saw. Like, that river was probably, I'm guessing, 4 to possibly even 8 times what it had been a quarter of an hour earlier. There was logs, you know, as round as me and, you know, 8 or 10 feet long, hurtling down the river. It was chocolate brown, and there's no way that you would have ever crossed it. And that was in about 20 minutes. Had a similar experience where we fished up from Kiwi Mouth one day, and it was westerly, few light showers, it was quite a nice day, but quite strong westerly. And as we got further up the river, started noticing some of these leaves moving on the edge and the colour looking a bit different. Shit, we need to get out of here and get out of here quick. So we bolted down the river, crossed a couple of crossings, ended up down the wrong side for quite a way from where the hut was, got to the next crossing and leaped into it, and basically had to swim for the first 10 metres or so till we got out the other side, and then bush bashed for an hour or so back to the hut where we were staying and where all of our gear was. But, you know, as an illustration, like half an hour from being, you know, low and easy to positively frightening, you know, it's so easy to get caught out. And, you know, that's what I'm saying, if you're going to fish high country rivers, you know, make sure you've got, you know, that wet weather gear, your PLB, you know, ideally your survival blanket, or better still a survival bag, and hopefully you'll get home safe. So as a quick example, and keep an eye on the time. So for example, I might go and fish the Narrara this weekend. So what am I going to do? So here we are, Napier, Turangi up here. I'm going to go up to Rocks Ahead up the Narrara. As I said earlier, this is the catchment area up here. You get all the rain across from the west. We look at the Napier forecast, like most of us, and probably think it's okay. So if I can get Kerry to chuck it up the next slide. Yeah. So here's our weather forecast for Friday. Napier forecast, 3 mil. Turangi forecast, 6 to 2 mil. So, yeah, I always check the Turangi forecast now if I'm going to go and fish the Narrara, because that's what's going to get in the river, not the Napier forecast stuff. The other really good resource is the Regional Council river levels and flows. So you can jump in there and it'll give you various rivers, and some of them have multiple sites. Just as a quick illustration, this one here, Mohaka at Poronui. We had a decent amount of rain in there 18th, 19th. Here at Raupunga, that spike showed up there pretty much around about 36, 48 hours, 2 days later from there. So if you're going to go and fish the Mohaka at Glen Falls, have a look, see what it's doing at Poronui. So you can see what's happening up there. That's going to affect where you are the next day if you're going to be there on the river. So that's a really, really useful resource. And there's multiple sites on there. Narrara is a bit of a tricky one, in that the top side is the Kuraponga one. So I would look at the Turangi forecast and have a look at the Mohaka at Poronui. So yeah, back to risks, crossing, where to cross, it's in the handout, tail of the pole, make sure that you've got somewhere where if you get halfway across and it's looking bad, you've actually got room to get out. So I always try and cross as high up the pool as I can, so I've got a decent run out area. You know, you don't want to be crossing right on the rapids, and what happens if I slip? That's a question I think we should all ask ourselves. Where will I end up, and could it end badly? So if you're thinking of crossing and there's this massive chute below you with all boulders in a waterfall, well, I'd say not the best place to actually cross. As I said, the most dangerous time of your day is when you hook a fish. And if I'm in a big bouldery river, I'm always looking, you know, what are the obstacles? If I hook a fish, how am I going to get out? You know, how can I get down the bank? You know, what obstacles going to dive around and break me off or whatever. So, you know, just to me, the most important thing is just being aware of your surroundings. And just a quick one, we talk about water safety, we think rivers. I went to the sport fly fish lakes competition they had at the Kuraponga Lakes recently. Sam was fishing here, I moved around one. The gentleman next to him waded about a metre out past where Sam was. Nice shingle, took a step into very soft putty-like mud. He tried to turn around and just sunk deeper, grabbed his wading pole, which was a nice one with elastic between it, and all the bits fell to bits, so he couldn't actually use it to get himself out of there. I tried to give him a hand with his wading pole, which, just being elastic between it, was absolutely useless. It ended up Sam and myself got in there and were able to help him out of the water, but he was in breathable waders, lace-up boots, and he was probably about a foot deep in the mud, and he fell forward before I got to him, filled up the front of his waders, and I would suggest that if we hadn't been there, someone might have found him drowned there. And you know, it was so incredibly quick, and you know, it's a beautiful day on the lake, and everyone thinks, hey, lakes are safe, but you know, just be aware, and particularly when you're wading, you know, be very, very careful. And it's surprising, it's shingly, and then drop very quickly into some really, really nasty mud. So in summary, plan well, tell someone where you're going, make sure you have appropriate footwear, and don't be scared to walk away, is my advice. You know, there's always another day, but there's days when we're all going to go to the river, and the river's dirty, and particularly if it's raining or going to rain and that river's rising, it's very easy to think, oh, what the heck, get yourself across the river and snooker yourself, and then you've got to take risks to get back. So my advice, you know, don't be scared to walk away. So we'll take questions at the end, and hand over to our next speaker.
Thanks.